everybody. This is Joe Wolverton with you today, as always, every Monday from 8 o'clock Mountain Time here at the mouth of Rock Canyon in beautiful Provo, Utah. Talking today about something that in my travels comes up all the time from the good people in America who are concerned about the threats to liberty, the various and myriad threats to liberty, persistent in our nations, particularly when it comes to federal overreach, and that is Common Core. The Common Core educational standards that are being imposed upon the states. And we're going to talk about that the entire hour today. We have special guest with us, Alex Newman of the New American Magazine, who has chronicled this disaster from its very inception, from the genesis, when it was a simple idea in the mind of Bill Gates, and the fact that he poured hundreds of millions into creating the thing and then poured hundreds of millions more into imposing it on the states. And we'll talk about how, the states, many proponents of Common Core say that, the states voluntarily adopted it. Well, in the strictest sense, I guess that's true. They did voluntarily adopt it, but were they not to adopt it, they forfeited any access to Race to the Top money, which is billions, I think it's $4.3 billion in federal aid to local schools. And those local schools would forfeit access to those funds if their state had not adopted Common Core standards. So you can see it's voluntary at the point of a gun. As much as it's voluntary that you voluntarily hand over your wallet to a robber. I mean, you could not do it and take the bullet, right? That is an option. You're not being forced to give it. You could keep your wallet and take the bullet. Okay, so I guess we can say from now on, we don't punish robbers because they didn't force you to give them your money. You voluntarily chose to give your wallet rather than take the bullet or the knife or whatever. So that's how states voluntarily adopted the Common Core standards. And now we're going to talk about it the entire hour today, because in my opinion, there has not been a more imposing and credible threat to liberty in this country since the Federal Reserve. I think Common Core is Obamacare for education. What Obamacare has done for healthcare, Common Core will do for education. It is the education prong of the Obamacare agenda, which, make no mistake, is nothing to do with just with healthcare. That is to say, healthcare is one aspect because they get to decide who lives and who dies. This Common Core will have a similar effect on education because, as we'll talk about with Melinda Gates, the foundation that paid the hundreds of millions to create Common Core on the state, they are huge supporters of the global population control effort. Let that marinate with you for just a minute. The people behind Common Core are the same people who are supporting Common Core, but who are supporting population control. So let's think of that for a minute. So we're going to talk to Alex here in just a minute. Talk all about these substantial connections between the Gates Foundation and Common Core, as well as the standards that are being imposed as part of Common Core. We're going to talk about the reading standards, the math standards, the facial recognition software that's a part of Common Core, the data mining that's a part of Common Core. You know, you have little Susies in class. And I want to say, first of all, I do know A lot of people have communicated with me. They're watching today in particular to see why Common Core is just that bad. Because it is. It's Obamacare for the classroom. You've got little Susie who's in school. She's in 4th grade, and the teacher decides to ask the entire class, we're going to take a little survey. We're just going to do it in class. We're going to have to take this home. It's just in-school work. And everybody raise your hand if your daddy owns a gun. Now, what's awesome about Common Core is the teacher doesn't even have to write down the kids that hold their hands up. You've got the camera in the classroom recording the whole thing. Now, of course, the camera was put in the classroom not to record the faces of the children for the facial recognition software that is a part of Common Core. No. As you'll go to your school district meetings, you'll find out that these cameras are being put in the classroom to prevent armed gunmen. And if there's ever an emergency, to keep the kids safe. That's what these cameras are for. They're for safety. So the questions go on. Whose daddy owns a gun? Raise your hand. Boom. All gun owners are now recognized because little Susie doesn't think there's anything suspicious in that. She's not a cynical member of the liberty movement who recognizes the move to disarm the civilian population. Whose parents read the Bible in their home? Boom. Now we've recognized all the religious fanatics. How many of you have more than 3 brothers and sisters? Boom. Now we recognize the people who have excessive numbers of children. Do you see how powerful this is? Do any of you ever talk about it being wrong for one man to marry another man? Do mommy and daddy ever talk about gay marriage? Raise your hand. Boom. All those people are now recognized. Because little Johnny and little Susie, they don't think there's anything wrong with that. They're just being honest the way they've been taught. Probably been taught that way by the crazy Bible-thumping parents, gun-toting wackos. But now they've all been identified. Now, I don't know they're doing anything wrong, but there you go. It's all been recorded. And it'll all be there for the government to use in any way they think necessary. That's Common Core. It is Obamacare for the classroom. If you love Obamacare, you'll love Common Core. But remember, if you love your teacher, you can keep your teacher. Isn't that something like that? If you like your teacher, you can keep your teacher. Or something. Anyway, we'll be back. KHQN AM 1480. Right. Good deal. Next we'll be coming up. Hey, the Fly's back. Sweet. He's been gone for so long. But now we are going to have Alex coming up after the break. We'll have the Fly. He'll chime in. See if he has anything to say about Common Core. He's been in every classroom. This Fly has been in these classrooms. He knows exactly what's happening and what's going on in these classrooms.
Hello.
Alex?
Speaking.
Tis
hey, John.
Joseph. Hey, what's going on?
Not too much.
All right. Well, we're coming out of the break in like a minute, and just over a minute, and we'll just jump right into it, man. All Common Core all the time. I've taken to calling it Obamacare for the classroom.
Nice.
Yeah. If you like your curriculum, you can keep your curriculum, right? Isn't that right? That's the deal, right? That's
exactly.
If you like your curriculum, you can keep your curriculum. Well, anyway, we'll talk about that. I want to talk about that Arn. Is it Arn or Arnie? I don't know how he pronounces it.
Arnie Duncan.
Arnie Duncan. Yeah. Did you read that quote that he had in the Washington Post over the weekend?
No. What did he say?
He said that real opposition to Common Core is white suburban mothers who are finding out that their kids aren't as smart as they thought they were.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's Washington Post over the weekend. I've got it pulled up. he's just, let's see what, I'm trying to see the date on the article. November 16th in the Post.
My goodness.
He says white suburban moms who all of a sudden realize their child isn't as brilliant as they thought they were. Well, there you go. That's the problem.
Oh, my goodness.
Rich white people.
I found another twist on this story a few days ago. I haven't written about it yet, but I'm going to start digging into it as soon as I have a minute. UNESCO writing about is developing the World Core curriculum, and of course Bill Gates and UNESCO are linked at the hip, so I'm sure this is all related.
All right, we are back. KHQN 1480 AM radio, and on the YouTube machine, the Google Plus Hangouts, channel 17 in Utah County. We are here with you. We're talking Common Core. We are talking about Common Core, which now I've taken to calling Obamacare for the classroom. Came to me in a moment of brilliance. It's what happens. It's a pure stream of intelligence. Came into my mind. Obamacare for the classroom. If you like your curriculum, you can keep your curriculum. That's the promise. So we're on the phone with Alex Newman, who I want to introduce for just a second. This guy is an amazing writer who has, in my opinion, has done the best writing on Common Core, not only on Common Core, but on lots of things that are happening that are threats to liberty. His writing on international subjects and including on the United Nations, particularly Agenda 21. This guy is developing a dossier, a personal resume of all the important threats to liberty. He's monopolizing all the important topics, things that are important to members of the liberty movement. Pretty soon, you're not going to go anywhere but to Alex Newman. I'm starting to think, I'm starting to realize that he's edging me out of a job. He's got Agenda 21, check. Common Core, check. United Nations, check. I mean, this guy has got it all on lock, and we're so happy to have him with us. Alex, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, but let me just add, Joe, that you're irreplaceable. So
Yes,
no worries about that.
Irreplaceable. Yes, irreplaceable, except by someone with talent. So, as long as we can keep Common Core, hey, that's true. Common Core is pretty much job security. Because if we can keep these kids dumbed down, they won't be able to write about things. So that's pretty cool. Now that I think about it, maybe I'm in favor of Common Core as a job security
they won't be able to read, though, either, so then we'll be in trouble.
That's right. Well, Alex, let me bring up to you first, and thanks so much for being with us. Let me bring up to you this quote over the weekend from Department of Education Secretary Arne Duncan, who over the weekend told a group of school superintendents, I guess he probably did it on Friday or Saturday. It was reported in the Washington Post over the weekend. He told this group of school superintendents that the real opposition to Common Core is coming from, quote, white suburban mothers who find out that their child isn't as brilliant as they thought he was. That's the opposition to Common Core. What do you think, Alex? Do we have white suburban? Is it rich white people that's causing all the problems?
You see, I think that's, first of all, really misleading because the opposition to Common Core is really coming from all over the place. I mean, just one of the Utah native, Dr. Gary Thompson, a child psychologist, gave an excellent presentation on why Common Core was such a threat to blacks and Hispanics and people with disabilities and special needs children. So this isn't just about white people or black people. It's just more silly divisions. The collectivists always like to divide people and make class warfare and race warfare and any kind of artificial division they can think of. They love to exploit that. But inadvertently, I think Arne Duncan hit on something important. Parents are figuring out that their kids are not being educated properly. And now they're starting to figure it out because Common Core is in the news and the light bulbs going off and say, hey, what is going on in these obedience training centers that the regime is running, that the Department of Education has pretty much taken over?
You've got to repeat that. Oh, wait.
Go ahead.
You've got, when you get the phrase that pays, man, don't run over it. We got obedience. I love that. So you've got Obamacare for the classroom, and now Alex chimes in with his own brilliant addition, obedience training centers. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, ever since the Department of Education took over, first it was created, and then they started these federal edicts and mandates and all this kind of stuff. And all we've seen is education going downhill. So I hope that inadvertently Arne Duncan is hitting on a proper point here, that parents are starting to realize, hey, what is going on? Why are my children not learning anything? Why are they just, why is all this political propaganda coming through in the classroom? Why aren't they learning to read and write and have critical thinking skills?
Well,
so, maybe he's more accurate than he realizes.
Well, yeah, I mean, anyone in the Obama administration would only be accurate if it was by accident. I mean, let's be honest. They're not chosen for their instance. They're chosen for their Chicago connections, or back in the day or something. I don't know. But when he says that it's rich white people, I mean, it's so funny that the first, quote, post-racial president seems to be the most racist president. I mean, you've got the fact that everything...
It's like their distance, right? They can deflect any kind of criticism just by saying, hey, look, Obama is half black, and so if you don't like, what this administration is doing, you just must not like half black people.
Right.
And of course that's ridiculous, but people who don't think a lot, maybe that rings a bell with them. And so, that's one of their main covers that they have right now, is just any criticism. They can just say, well, you just don't like Obama because he's half black. And that's absolutely ridiculous, but it seems to work in the minds of some simpletons.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We just had a caller call in and say Obamacore. Let's start calling it Obamacore. I love it. I'm going to trademark that. Thank you, caller. Trademark. Alex, you can use it, of course. I'll let you use it. Obamacore,
Excellent.
if you like your curriculum, you can keep your curriculum. So let's talk a little bit about the curriculum. Yeah, Alex? I mean, I'm going to tell you the truth. I had family call me last week. One of my sisters-in-law, shout out to you out there in Connecticut, called me and said, we're yanking our kids out of school because this Common Core stuff is out of control. And she's like, where can I go to get sort of a one-day lesson on all the evils of Obamacare? I point out your stuff, and, I read it and looked at it too, and it's interesting. But one of the things that I read when I was reading about the Arnie Duncan's quote about how rich white people, I want to know, he's when I start reading this, Alex, it's like I'm reading something that is a novel, like some sort of dystopian novel, and it says how, as part of Common Core, they are taking Shakespeare and Poe out of the literature portion, out of the English portion of Common Core, out of the curriculum, and replacing it with Malcolm Gladwell and climate change propaganda, because Shakespeare and Poe are not, quote, fact-based, whereas climate change and Malcolm Gladwell are fact-based, and we want our kids to only read factual things. What do you think about that?
Well, it's exactly what's going on, and that's one of the biggest criticisms that even people who aren't opposed to standards per se have had with this, and that's that they're replacing the classics, the great things and all these treasures that Americans used to be exposed to. They're replacing them with total nonsense. Some of the things that I looked at from my article when I was looking into the actual standards themselves, making the kids executive regulate house for change, and they're making the kids read stuff that's ridiculous, unconstitutional, and beyond useless, and they're replacing that with things that people used to read to develop critical thinking skills, understand society and civilization and the history of man. And
we'll no longer be
mind-boggling.
We won't have grandchildren. And look, let's be honest. Our grandchildren. You are younger than I am, but we're the same generation. Our grandchildren will not know to be or not to be. They won't know. They won't know that. But they will exactly. They will know that the Earth is plunging into the river. They will realize that and be able to accept, like you say, the edicts and everything like that, and to call climate change glad fact-based, whereas you're saying, well, we can't have Shakespeare because it's nothing but fiction, it's nothing but fantasy. Really, I mean, if the goal is to teach you English, who better than the greatest writer in the history of the language? Here's a question for you, Alex, that maybe is more important than the fact that they're ditching Shakespeare, which I think is a crime against humanity. Maybe UNESCO should look into that. Maybe the UNESCO should look in. Well, they won't now because we're out. But maybe UNESCO should look into the crime against humanity, cutting out Shakespeare. But for example,
I'm sure the new president, the communist Chinese regime's vice education minister, will get right on that.
He will be on that. That'll be at the top of his list.
I'm sure.
After murdering dissidents. Well, you've got to come on. You got to have your priorities. But now here's a question for you, Alex, and this is something that I've learned just recently because of the association with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the fact that this is the money behind population control and also the money behind Common Core. The same fountain of money provides money for sterilization and Common Core. Control seems to be the goal behind it all. So what do you think is the real goal behind those who are promoting Common Core? What's the actual goal, other than let's make everybody, have a standard curriculum? What's the real goal?
That is a really loaded question, Joe, and I think it depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. But on the surface, at least, the goal is to standardize education first across the United States and eventually across the world. You just talked about UNESCO. UNESCO right now, of course, linked Bill Gates at the hip. They're right now developing the World Core curriculum. So eventually we want all the serfs to learn the exact same material, which, as we just discussed, is mostly nonsense masquerading as fact and science. I mean, digging it takes you deeper and deeper and deeper until you feel like you're in bizarro world. But
yeah, but
it's definitely not to educate the kids properly.
Well, we don't. Yeah, but that's the surface. But I mean, we don't have to dig. All due respect, we don't have to dig too deeply to realize that the same people paying for sterilization throughout the world are the same people who paid to develop Common Care.
And actually, that's one of the articles that I'm planning to do pretty soon here. I've been plotting on it for a while, but I'm going to do an article just looking at Bill Gates. Who is Bill Gates? What kind of things is he using his billions of dollars for? What are his passions? And then, of course, we'll tie that into Common Core. Why would this guy who's obsessed with abortion and population control and sterilization and the United Nations and hocus-pocus global warming theories and Malthusian population zealot, so why would this guy be so interested and so passionate that he's willing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on nationalizing America's education system? And that's a question that needs to be explored, because right now people who don't know about Bill Gates, they just think of him as, that nice philanthropist who just he got really rich being a good capitalist, and now he just gives his money to nice causes. But you don't even have to scratch below the surface to see that that's ridiculous. Just look at his interests, and they clearly don't align vast majority of the American people.
Well, hold on through the break, Alex, but I smell Pulitzer if you can connect the dots between population control and Common Core. We'll be right back. All right, Alex, we are on a break. We're on a break for the radio, but we're still live on the YouTube and the Google Plus and everything. I'm serious. If there, because I haven't read one other than, just sort of casual mentions of the fact that Bill, I know there was an article in Business Insider that made a connection, or Crisis Magazine, I guess it was, Crisis Magazine that made a connection, population control and Common Core. But I see that, to me, that would be one of the most important things to read. Because, yes, you want your kids to be well-educated. You want them to understand the core principles of freedom that this country was built upon. You want them to know the great literature of the world. You want them to know science and math as it really is. But if there's lurking beneath all that, if there is a population control agenda, that's explosive to me. That's press-stopping stuff right there.
Yeah, I mean, I've touched on that in a couple of articles that I've written about Common Core, and they have this component of it. It's like the science and history standards. It's not technically part of Common Core, but it's being developed by the same people, foisted on the states with the same bribes from the Obama administration. and that's the health and sexuality standards. And these were actually written by Planned Parenthood, abortion giant of the world. These are the people who were recently accused last year, actually, in testimony before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, of engaging in forced abortions in China, working with the communist dictatorship over there. So the UN Population Fund, the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and the communist mass murderers from Beijing have been collaborating with each other to force women into abortions and to murder their children. So the rabbit hole goes really, really deep. And for anybody who wants to dig further, look up Alice Bailey, one of the chief occultists of the 20th century and big supporter of UNESCO, and the guy who really led the charge for the World Core Curriculum over at UNESCO, a guy by the name of Robert Mueller. He admits that the goal of this World Core Curriculum is to get the teachings of Alice Bailey into the minds of all the children of the world. So that's really where this is all going.
What was his name or her name? What is it, Alice or Alex?
Alice, A-L-I-C-E.
Okay, Alice Bailey.
B-A-I-L-E.
Yeah, we're gonna have to have everybody dig into that, because this thing needs to be exposed for what it is. And okay, we're back in about 10 seconds, Alex. So we'll just go silent here for a few seconds till it comes back on the radio. Talk about facial rec next, by the way. We are back. We are talking today all day. Well, all day. We could talk about it all day. I'd love to do it. It'd be a public service. We're talking about Common Core, that I'm now calling Obama Core, trademark. Sounds Stephen Colbert now, trademark. So anyway, we're talking with Alex Newman of the New American Magazine, a guy who's published all over the world and who is an authority. If you want to know about the UN's secret agenda, if you know about Agenda 21, if you want to know about Common Core, if you want to know about UNESCO and the sorts of shenanigans going on there to destroy the world, American, click on thing that has anything to do with Common Core, and then on Alex Newman, spending a little time with us today talking about this. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, now this is something that I was talking about before we went on live, and that's the facial recognition stuff. Because here's something I see. I'm going to paint you a picture, and then you correct me, yeah? So here we go. We've got the cameras being put in the classroom, and of course it's for the children's safety. And the teacher stands up and says, "We're going to do a little survey. We're going to ask some questions. Everybody, raise your hand if your daddy owns a gun." So little Johnny, little Susie, they don't know anything's going on. They're not, callous and they raise. Daddy owns a gun. How many of you have your daddy and mommy ever said that they don't like a man marrying another man? Raise your hand. Boom. I died. Just have the Bible in your home. Boom. Identified. So you've got like the religious nuts, you've got the gun toters, you've got the anti-gays. How many of you guys have more than 3 brothers and sisters? Raise your hand. Boom. Now you've got the crazy people that are sending out, as Bill Gates said in his TED. I watched this TED thing with Bill Gates about the population control. There was a link to it in the Business Insider. Now, need population control. Sterilization is because all these people are putting out carbon dioxide. Okay, Alex, is it me? When I was a kid, I learned that we breathe in the oxygen and breathe out the carbon dioxide. So to cut out the carbon dioxide, wouldn't we have to cut out the breathing in of the oxygen?
Well, that's exactly right.
The biggest threat to the world.
I actually still have trouble imagining how they could have pulled this swindle on humanity. That carbon dioxide is a pollutant, is pollution. That now the EPA is making this claim, and they're saying that's why they need to regulate CO2 emissions. The UN is making this claim, and they are literally tricking a significant segment of humanity into believing that their own breath is pollution in need of regulation, in need of population control, because it's supposedly causing global warming.
Well, I've got a solution.
It's so easy to debunk, but it's getting out there.
I've got a solution. Look, this is a typical government solution. I've got a solution. We wouldn't be putting out all this CO2 for all the O2. So I say deforestation. Before we depopulate, let's deforest the globe. Then there won't be so much oxygen, and by the transitive properties of how our lungs work, if you reduce the O2, the oxygen, you'll reduce the CO2. Am I right? I mean, I'm not a scientist or anything, but I'm just saying we cut down all the trees, there won't be as much oxygen, and then we won't produce as much carbon dioxide. Am I right about that?
Well, see, using their line of reasoning, I mean, that's perfectly reasonable. Okay. So I mean, people have to understand that this is just literally, the world is upside down now. Carbon dioxide, life on Earth can't exist without carbon dioxide. This is ridiculous. Well, and they're pretending like this is pollution.
Maybe you've hit on it. Maybe all the insiders, all the establishment, the Bill Gates, they all have their stockpile of oxygen tanks. So if they can, cut out all these CO2 producers, then they can have the Earth themselves. I mean, but let's get back to Common Core, because, man, you talk about going down a rabbit hole with CO2. But let's talk about Common Core. So you've got these cameras. Explain to us, Alex, the deal with this facial recognition software that's a part of Common Core.
See, I mean, the way you say it, the way it sounds when you say it, it sounds like some kind of dystopian George Orwell novel or something. But the fact is that's exactly where we're heading. And what you just described is not far-fetched, not even one iota. I mean, the federal government is already using these facial recognition cameras in some of their education programs. They admit this in Department of Education documents, and these can, recognize facial expressions. So, I mean, the potential for mischief is huge. And as we know from looking at history, if you give governments the potential tools to use for mischief, they will use them for mischievous purposes. So, I mean, and the idea that people can just, I'm just going to homeschool my kids, I'm just going to send them to private school, then I don't have to worry about this, you're wrong. This is not going to be limited just to government schools. This is going to be, it's already accepted in, I think, half of the Catholic dioceses in the United States.
That's right, yep.
And this is going to hit homeschoolers. It's already starting in Tennessee.
Explain.
All the tests are being modeled on the Common Core stuff.
Okay,
so
explain.
This
explain
is going to affect everybody.
Contact me. They say, and I even said, Alex, I'm going to throw myself down on this. I say, the solution is homeschool your kids, but now you be a protection anymore. And you mentioned something about Tennessee. Can you, which is my home state, by the way. So, will you explain the connection then between Common Core and how that will infiltrate homeschooling? Please explain that. That's explosive to me.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think probably for the next 5, 10, maybe 15, 20 years, homeschoolers might still get away with escaping the worst parts of Common Core. But what's happening in Tennessee right now, and that's just the one example that I've seen posted up on the Homeschool Legal Defense Association's website, is the government is starting to force schoolers organizations to take the state tests, or I guess they're actually federalized tests now that the federal government is funding these consortiums, but they're forcing the homeschoolers to take these tests that are aligned with Common Core. So if you're forced that are aligned with Common Core, that you need Common Core, standardized testing. And this is just a start, that these people do not plan to stop at government schools. They don't plan to stop until every child in the world, except their own, is learning this nonsense.
Well, and let's just, I want to put a finer point on it, Alex, because you and I both know better than I, and I only know through my personal associations, but you know through not only probably your personal association. I know you've covered, for example, the woes of homeschoolers internationally, which is just heart-wrenching. But I know from associations that many homeschoolers are associated with religion. They homeschool because they want to teach their children a more typically based. They don't want them not be taught creationism, for example. So I can see something happening, and I want you to talk about it too, because, for example, you and I are both associated with Freedom Project Education, an online school which is amazing and teaches a classical curriculum as well as, a very broad-based classical curriculum as well as important constitutional classes. But if we have a curriculum in Common Core in the public school, or even let's say it infiltrates, as you say it already has, to the private schools, and you have these cameras, these facial recognition cameras, who not only record facial expression, but also just record everything that's going on, and you have these teachers say, okay, everybody in third grade, innocent kids who don't know, how many of you read the Bible at home every day? Raise your hand. You're self-identifying the religious, quote-unquote, fanatics, right? And so, because if you sent out if the government, if the Department of Education, even the State Department of Education sent out a survey asking these questions, do you own a, do you with gay, quote, marriage, most people would tear those surveys up and never participate. But if you've got the children self-identifying with being a gun owner, with being a religious, with being someone whose family preaches traditional values, including traditional marriage, what a boon people who have enemies have the identifying.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what the book's done here, some deep and in-depth or well in, along with Common Core. What they've done here is they've bribed the state governments to either create or expand their state databases for vacuuming up all this information on the kids, and then as a condition of receiving these grants, which I think virtually every state in the country has accepted them, is that they have to pass all this data, all this information on the kids and the families that they're gathering up. They have to send it to the Department of Education. So this is just a literal pipeline from the school, the state government. It's first from it. They have down.
It will. Where I may think am when I call this Obamacare for the classroom, it seems to me that you'll have the equivalent, that this data mining, this facial recognition stuff is going to be an aid to establishing the educational equivalent of Obama's death panels. You've got the government with the power to decide who lives or dies in hospitals and now in classrooms. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. The last segment talking about Common Core. Please stay tuned. I love how that song plays in Joseph Stalin when we're talking about Common Core. That's awesome. But Alex, we'll be back in just under 2 minutes live. Anyway, so yeah, I've got family now that's scared of this, and I know they're tuning in. But being a civil rights educator, I don't mean that for alternative. Right, Alex? You teach economics too. What grade do you teach economics?
I teach Introduction to Economics. I think most of my students are in 11th grade, and then I teach economics, the introduction. You can take the advanced course, and that's mostly seniors, although I had 15th class. So.
Right. Well, and I think that, in my classes, I teach, well, now I'm going to teach 3. I taught 4 last year. I know a lot of the students come from a religious background. Not all of them, but many of them come from a religious background where the parents don't want them exposed to, the types of things being taught in the traditional public school classroom because they're opposed to teaching a strict evolutionary explanation for life. They're opposed to teaching climate change. They're opposed to teaching acceptance of alternative lifestyles, etc. So I see this Common Core, if it is able to infiltrate a as being, I really do. Back. Wow. Took me for everything I had and kicked me out of my home. That sounds more like the Federal Reserve rather than Common Core. But I will tell you that I really do believe, Alex, that Common Core, the establishment of Common Core, is the greatest coup pulled off by the enemies of liberty in the United States since the establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913. I think this is the greatest threat to liberty since the establishment of the Federal Reserve. Because I believe what the Federal Reserve has done for the strength of the dollar, Common Core will do for the value of education in America.
To the minds of our children.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I agree with you entirely, Joe. This is huge. People don't really understand the repercussions of this. They are going to be educating almost all of the children in this country. Those children are going to go on to be the voters, the politicians, the business executives, the bureaucrats. So what they're doing here is they are fundamentally, radically transforming the makeup of America by, every dictator in all of history, Hitler, Stalin, all of them have known that the key to cementing totalitarian control is control over the minds of the young. And so if they manage to pull this off, it is going to be very, very difficult to turn the clock after this gets, embedded. Because even if you do get a few who slip through the cracks, even if you do get a few whose parents teach them the truth and teach them about liberty and teach them about the Bible, they're going to be surrounded by people who hate them. And so, now that everybody thinks this is some kind of democracy where the mob gets to decide everything. So, I mean, what's going to happen to them? It's not going to...
Let's be honest. Spades. Those of you who are home, in a manner of speaking, a temple of learning, to teach your kids about their God-given rights, about the existence of a God, about their fraternity as children of God, about the creation of the world, about liberty, how the Spirit of God is the Spirit of freedom, all of this, and you look to your home as a safe place. That's just not going to be true going forward because we've got the surveillance state is creeping into the home itself. We know that now. And now we've got it in the classroom. And like you say, it's the children because these kids, they're innocent, they're honest, they don't know that they're participating in things that will have horrible repercussions for their family. They will have no idea. I want to there's a viewer who brought up, she's a teacher, she or he, she, one of them, is a teacher, and says they like Common Core because, one, their state chose it. Well, if you missed the top of the show, your state chose it the way you choose to give your money to a robber at gunpoint. I mean, you can say, yeah, you voluntarily gave your money to the robber because you chose to give your money rather than take the bullet. That's the way that states voluntarily chose Common Core. Because if you do not adopt Common Core, if states do not adopt it, they lose access to the Race to the Top funds, which, of course, are invaluable, of course, to these classrooms because they've become dependent. These school districts have become dependent on the federal government, which is what they want at the end of the day anyway. But to say, with all due respect to the teacher who commented on that, to say that a chose Common Core is to say you chose to give your money to the robber, Right, because you didn't take the bullet. So the robber didn't do anything wrong. You did. You chose to allow yourself to be robbed at gunpoint. You could have taken the bullet. So I don't want to hear it from you. Don't cry to me. You chose to give your money to the robber. That's the way you chose Common Core. Let's be honest. Look into this. And the second thing is she says that one curriculum around the country is good because that way she knows where the students should be when they transfer in from others. We're all on the same sheet of music, so I know where my student should be when he comes in from another state. Well, why does that? I was in a military family. I moved around more than anybody, and I was just expected to either one even you had him say, lop off all the daisies that are above the other ones. In other words, if you dare get smarter, we'll kill you. What this is Common Core is saying, Alex, is it not? Let's not allow anyone. Let's not have a transfer student come in and be ahead. Let's make behind.
That's exactly right, Joe. And I mean, I'll address these two first, but it holds true for almost every claim that Common Core supporters make. If you look at the claim, it's very easily shown to be false. And then the same is true in this case, or ridiculous. So let's first take the one about, the states chose it.
Right.
I think your analogy is spectacular. And another thing that was maybe even more insidious is, you remember when they were marketing the quote-unquote stimulus bill?
Yeah.
One of the big things was, state governments, they're losing tax revenue, so they're going to have to fire teachers and reduce school budgets if we don't pass this stimulus bill. Well, guess what those school stimulus funds were attached to? Acceptance of Common Core and adoption of these Orwellian surveillance systems. So what they did there was they created a built-in special interest in, school administrators, school teachers, who were led to believe that their job depended on accepting this money and accepting the strings that come attached with it. So if you think that your job, your livelihood, your health care, your insurance, everything depends on supporting Common Core, you're going to support Common Core pretty hard, right? And probably a lot of people remember when he was talking about the stimulus thing. We have to do this because otherwise state governments are going to start laying off government workers and it's going to hurt the middle class, blah, blah, blah. But he didn't say was, we're going to send out all this money that we don't have. We're just going to borrow it from the communist Chinese regime or tell the Federal Reserve to print it. And then we're going to force all the states and all the local government exactly what we say. So that's really where they built in. And I mean, all the teachers haven't fallen for it without question. I've talked to tons of teachers who think this is just literally the worst thing that's ever happened is, big government teaming up with big business to oppress. But they did very insidiously there create this in class of support for Common Core because these people were led to believe that their livelihood depended on accepting this. And then if we address the silly argument that, that way all kids, if they move from state to state, will be at the same place. I mean, the numbers show that applies to less than 3% of American students. So should we really nationalize the education system for 3% of the students? And even a second grader goes to another state and has to, learn a little more or is a little bit ahead of his peers. What's the big deal? I mean, that's no argument to nationalize the education system with this radical, draconian, expensive scheme that is Obamacare.
Yeah, Obamacare. Now you're doing it too. What trademark? Yeah, and I like what you say. And the thing that I'm thinking is, first of all, we're not going to nationalize something for 3%. I mean, if we're going to do that, we're going to go ahead and take everything, any sort of demographic that we have, that 3% of the people, that is true for 3% of the people, and let's nationalize that, okay? So you don't want to start doing that. Because you talk about a rabbit hole. Talk about all the things that 3% of the people have in common that we're going to now make national across the board. Can you imagine the sorts of depravity? But the thing that I'm thinking about is, who cares? Because what you're doing is you're not saying that you want a standard, you want to make sure that all kids reach a certain standard. And first of all, Alex, what happened to local control? Should there be a standard? For example, I practiced law for several years, and the standard, for example, for medical care is called the community standard. What is true for doctors in New York City, for example, might not be true for doctors in some remote town in the Appalachians in West Virginia, for example. They wouldn't have the same access. You can't hold them to the same standard. But now you've got it being nationalized. What's true for a student in New York should be true for a student in California. And the thing that we're going to have is it's not going to cause everyone else to raise up. It's going to cause everyone to take steps down to where you have a nationalized dumbing down of America. And of course, the kids are going to be none the wiser. And that's, I think, where the issue comes in. We've got 2 minutes, Alex. I want you, if you can just riff for just under 2 minutes. Tell us, Alex, let everybody know, because I know a lot of people chimed in saying they were dying to see this show and you were going to be on. So will you go for the next minute, 30 seconds, and tell us what of the most noxious elements of Common Core?
Well, I think a lot of them we've hit on already. This is literally the dumbing down of students all across America. Then you have the global component of it. You have them teaching the globalist ideas as if they were truth, as if they were fact, and it's only going to get worse from here. If people think these standards are bad now, just wait until they start revising them, because they can be revised. There's one way for them to be revised. They're copyrighted by the National Governors Association, which is a nonprofit trade entity funded by the federal government in Washington, D.C., and the Council of Chief State School Officers. So they can be changed, but these two groups own the copyright, and so when they decide to change them, and they will, and they've said that they will, it's only going to get worse from here, and I can almost guarantee you that. And then you have the relationship with what's going on around the world. They keep calling it internationally benchmarked, as if this was some kind of, in some ways, but benchmark Finland and planning to. And then just people can go on UNESCO's website, look up the World Core Curriculum, look up Robert Mueller, who led UNESCO towards creating World Core Curriculum.
Let's have them do that, and let's have everybody go to thenewamerican.com, read all of Alex's reports on Common Core, what we're now calling Obama Core. If you like your curriculum, you can keep your curriculum. We're out. All right. Good deal, Alex. Thank you so much, man. Holy cow.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
Totally, whenever you're